Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. Today we have Jeffrey Miner, who is a sales trainer, founder, author, and podcast host. Hello, Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on your show. What would you like to cover today, my friend?
Well, we're going to cover a little bit of your journey, your success, the businesses, how you've been able to develop those businesses, and as well as your sales career before you started the business. We're going to go into a little bit about your methodology that you've got there and how you grow these businesses. So it's going to be quite a varied selection that we're going to ask you about. But the first question I ask all of my guests is, the podcast is called The Absolute Business Mindset. What does a business mindset mean to you?
Business mindset, in my mind, means that you have absolute certainty in what you're doing and commitment. Without certainty in what you're doing, and without the full commitment, your business will never go where you want it to go. If you have those two things, it's pretty hard not to be extremely successful and help a lot of people.
And as you're a sales trainer and founder of a business in sales, do you find that's exactly the same for you as a business person and a salesperson as well, or are they different?
I would say, I had a 17-year sales career before I retired in 2017. Then I started seventh level in 2018. So we're 4 years old. My success and results in sales came from the first thing was my commitment, because you'll never be successful in what you do if you're not committed to being the best at that thing, right? Yeah. If you look at professional athletes, they are all committed to being the best. They don't just like halfway commit. And, actors and actresses that make tens of millions of dollars per film, they're just not halfway committed. They don't have 1 foot in, 1 foot out with like a plan B and a plan C. You have plan A and you're all in, and you figure out how to make plan A extremely successful. Now, that doesn't just happen by you manifesting it or wishing it happens or hoping it happens or just praying it happens. My good friend Andy Andrews says, God feeds the birds, but he doesn't drop worms in their nest. You have to do something, right? You have to acquire the right skills. You have to learn that ability in sales. You have to learn that sales ability, and then you have to take action on that. But it all comes down to commitment, because if you're not committed to learn and keep growing and learning, then you're never going to go anywhere, because you have to learn the right skills. Like I said, you want to be a brain surgeon. Well, if you don't have commitment to learn, you can't go successfully perform brain surgeries. It's the same thing in business too. Business and sales is all the same.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast a little bit earlier on today where they talked about personal responsibility being critical. Yeah. I think that's kind of what you're saying. Like, you need to commit to something, but it's your responsibility to be the best at it to make it successful.
Yeah. I mean, just look at all the top 1% of people in life that do anything. You're a professional athlete, you're a professional actress, you're a professional psychologist that gets paid thousands of dollars an hour, whoever you are, business owner. The reason why they're in the top 1% or they're the best is because they simply are far more committed than everybody else. It all comes down to commitment. That's the foundation. If you're not committed, you're just never going to be at the very top. There's no person at the very, very top that is not committed in that profession that got there because they were just not committed. I mean, everybody's committed to get there. So they learn the right skills. They acquire the skills that allow them to get there, and they're willing to do things. Everybody's heard this. They're willing to do things others are just not willing to do. And that doesn't mean like be unethical or do crazy stuff.
No,
it just
I really like the saying when they say, yeah, I'm an overnight success. It just took me 10 years to get here.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a continued process. And with that comes acquiring new skills. As our organization has grown, Inc. magazine here in the US ranked us the fastest growing sales training company the last 2 years in a row. We'll probably win that 3 years in a row. But it's because our team is all committed. We are on the same vision. We are on the same path. And as changes need to be made, we are committed for our clients and customer base to make those changes for their good. And when you are able to do that as an organization, and that's your first goal, to make changes as you need and to learn and get better in all departments, you're just going to have a company that scales very, very quickly.
Okay, I'm going to take a slightly different tact. I've got a question that I sometimes ask outside of sales, so before sales. Tell me one thing in your upbringing that reflects who you are now.
Yeah, it all comes back down to commitment, because I learned from a very early age that I had to be committed. So I grew up on a cattle ranch. So quite literally, I grew up in the state of Missouri. I know you're over in the UK, but so maybe so you're like,
yeah, no, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so Midwest, if you've heard of that. And I grew up on a cattle ranch it was like a 600-acre ranch. We had cattle, we had dairy cows, we had horses. So I was up from age like 6 on till like 18 at 4 a.m, milking cows like 6-7 days a week. Right. I had to be committed because that's just my chores, right? Now, I didn't necessarily like that. Yeah. But I didn't like the farm work. It made me actually when I was 18, leave home. I'm like, I'm going to the city. I'm a city slicker. I'm not a farm boy. I'm a city slicker. I'm so burned out. But that commitment and, playing high school sports, I also played college baseball. So I had to be committed. I wasn't necessarily the most athletic in our conference, in our division. But if you go back and you talk to people, my teammates, they will tell you I was far more committed than everybody else. I was committed to stay and watch game film on the weekends where most of them were out partying. I was more committed to get up at 4 and 5 in the morning and to go run hills and to work out with coaches by myself to get better. And because I did that, it made me better than most everybody else who I competed against, not because I was necessarily the most athletic. I was just far more committed to outlearn them, to outgain them. And that can get you really far in life for sure.
Absolutely. So you studied behavioral sciences and then came out of it. What made you choose sales as a starting point for your career?
I don't know if I really chose it. It just kind of happened. It's just kind of interesting how divine providence kind of, the heavens open and these opportunities come into your lap. You have to take advantage of them. But, I was in behavioral science, human psychology. I was learning from different professors, like, behavioral science, if we really peel the layers back, is really the study of the brain and behavioral patterns. Like, why do human beings do things? Why do they make decisions? Why do they go left instead of going right? Why do they say yes instead of saying no? So really sales, right? You just don't talk about it. So I started learning from my professors like Robert Cialdini. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's got a great book called Persuasion, Influence. He's the head of behavioral science here at Arizona State University here in Arizona. But I started learning from professors like him. The most persuasive way to communicate was here. And I was just kind of learning this. It was just always intriguing to me to understand how the human brain works. And my junior year in college, I remember I was sitting in the dorm room. No, I was out of the dorms. I was in like these apartments. So I had like all these roommates. And one of them came in. They're like, hey, there's this job fair today, and there's these companies hiring, and you can make a ton of money in the summer, and then you can focus on your school the rest of the year. And I'm like, that's a really good idea. I didn't know anything about it. And they're like, oh, there's free pizza. And so I went to get the free food because I was broke, 21-year-old kid. And, they basically sign up everybody there because it's straight commission. So everybody gets hired. There's like 100 people that got hired that day, straight commission, selling to the dream. It's going to be easy. You're going to make all this money in the summer. You don't have to work the rest of the year. So everybody signs up. And, that's how I got into sales. It just happened one day. And after a while, I'll be short with the story, but after a while of not doing very well at all because of the way I was taught how to sell from the company and the books that they gave us from, the sales gurus, I started learning. I'm like, wait a minute, here, my professors are saying that the most persuasive way to communicate is here. But all these books I'm reading from these I call them the old sales gurus, they're saying it's over here. Like we're talking opposite.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense. So I'm like, how do I take the theory of behavioral science and how the human brain makes decisions and wrap that into my sales process? And that's what I started learning to do. I started learning how to use techniques that work with human behavior, that cause prospects to let their guard down. We call that disarming the prospect. Okay. Right. That trigger the prospect to pull me in rather than me trying to push them forward. Once I started doing that, selling became very, very easy and extremely profitable. And that's where it all.
And one of the quotes, or one of the things I was reading about you, was that you said salespeople, the successful salespeople, are not pushing products, but often solving problems that the client has.
That's part of it. I mean, problem, you have to, like any book behind me here, if you're watching this, will say you have to be a problem solver. And I totally agree with that. But if you peel the layers off, like if your prospects don't buy from you, you can't solve their problem. So you're not really a problem solver until after the transaction has taken place, right? Like if you really think about it, you can't be a problem solver until after they purchase, and now your product or service solves their problem. So if you want to make a ton more sales, you have to be much better at what's called problem finding. So we have to learn how to become a problem finder, right? And a problem solver, not a product pusher. I think that's what you're talking about. Now, what does problem finding mean? Problem finding means asking the right questions at the right time in the conversation with the right tone. Because there's certain questions you have to ask in more of a curious tone. Like, John, can you walk me through what you guys see? That's a curious tone. There's other questions that you have to ask in more of a skeptical or challenging tone. But what happens if, that's a challenging tone. And there's other questions you have to learn how to ask in more of I would say a concerned tone, a tone that shows empathy. So how do you know how to do that? So I started learning how to do that. Okay. Prospects started pulling me in rather than me having to push them forward. And that's where everything pretty much changed overnight. And that's where the methodology NEPQ comes from, Neuroemotional Persuasion Questioning.
So what do you tell me about that? Tell me about that, because I'm interested to know Neuroemotional Persuasion Questions. So you developed this methodology. So why don't you tell me about it?
We'll be back after a quick break. Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
Yeah. Well, it might be easier for everybody if they understood the background of the different types of communication. Because I think a lot of people in sales and business, you don't know what you don't know, right? So according to behavioral science, there's 3 forms of communication. Okay. And I would suggest you write these 3 forms down, because once you understand where you are now, even if you're already doing well, or let's say you're the business owner and your salespeople are doing good, but once you understand where you're at now compared to where you could be, it will completely change everything. And we even have this with like Fortune 500 companies that already do billions of dollars a year that think they're doing well. Once they acquire these skills, it goes to a whole different level. Okay.
Right. I've got my pen. I'm ready. So why don't you share it with all of us?
So the first mode of communication, and I'm not going to give you the scientific term because it wouldn't make any sense. But if I asked you this question, Mark, if I said the words boiler room selling, what's the first image that comes in your brain right now?
Oh, a big boiler sort of chugging away in someone's house or in someone's business.
Boiler room selling? Interesting. Yeah. I've never heard that. So typically when I say that at events, people they've seen movies like Gordon Gekko or Wolf on Wall Street. So boiler room selling here in the States, boiler room selling is a term where you imagine like salespeople, old school salespeople from 30, 40 years ago in like this huge office, and they're just on the phones manipulating, pressuring people. That's kind of a term here that we would call it boiler room selling. Maybe it's different in the UK. I love that, man. You're like, oh, a room with a big boiler in there. That's
what I was thinking. Apologies. Go for it.
I love it. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen any movies like Wolf on Wall Street?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean now.
Yeah. So you know what I mean now. Okay. So I love that. So according to the data, we're the least persuasive when we tell people things, or we attempt to dominate them or posture them, manipulate them, or push them into doing something we want them to do. Like if you look at the shows that I just described, Wolf on Wall Street, hey, I got a great opportunity for you. We talk about the features and benefits, and then we push and tell them why they need to buy from us. And we're the #1 market leader, and we have the best this, the best that, like every salesperson says. And it's just like, I'll give you an analogy. It's just like if you tell your spouse or your teenager kid that they really, really need to do something and you keep pushing them, what do they typically do back?
Push against it.
They push back. It's just human. If we push, human behavior pushes back. I mean, when as a society, if we're forced to do something by a government, what do most of the citizens do? They push back. Yeah, they don't want to do it, even if it's good for them. They don't want to do it because they feel like they're forced. Nobody wants to be forced. It's once again, it's behavioral patterns as human beings. Okay. So I'll give you a few examples of the least persuasive way to sell: presenting. Okay. We've all been taught, have to have a great presentation, show them your 60 to 90 minute slide deck. Here's our corporate office. Here's a picture of our corporate office. Here's a picture of our founders. They're so awesome. Here's a picture of all of our customer service words. Here's some of our clients. We have the best this, we have the best that, which, like I said, by the way, doesn't every single salesperson that's ever tried to sell you anything say they have the #1 product or service?
Yeah.
How many salespeople, everybody listening to me, how many salespeople have ever tried to sell you something said, you know what, Mark, we're the 5th best service in the market? Nobody does, right? They all say they're the market leader. So in a prospect's mind, psychologically, when we make statements like that, just so everybody knows, the prospect actually trusts you less, especially when you talk down about your competitors. Why? Because they're used to every single salesperson who's ever sold them anything from a vacuum cleaner to a car, to a life insurance policy, to, maybe a home, to, let's say, cybersecurity for their office, saying that they have the best.
But can I ask one question, Jeremy? And I want to hear all three of them. But in the Wolf of Wall Street period, so sort of 80s and 90s, where these things were the buzz way of doing it, were they successful then as salespeople?
I think they were successful, but they had to play the numbers game. I think they went through a lot of numbers to have success. Right. Could they have been far more successful with what were to go over? Yes, for sure. Now, things have changed, though. You back there in the 80s and 90s, what was the bridge between a company and the consumer? It was you, the salesperson. So a prospect expected to be educated about a product or service. Besides newspaper or TV commercials or radio, that's the only way they knew about what you did. Yeah. Now, with the power of the internet, and especially social media, we live in a different age. We live in the information age, right? Mm-hmm. Your prospects know everything about your company, your products, your services, how long you've been in business, who your competitors, what your price points are. They know everything about you by doing a Google search on their freaking phone. Yeah. And because of that newfound power, they no longer will be manipulated or pressured by pushy salespeople because they know they have many options to choose the exact product or service that you sell. Okay. Yeah. So were they successful in the 80s? Yes. Could they have been far more successful with what we're going to talk about, human behavior? Yes, as well. Okay. Right. And there were. Okay. So, so that's I'll kind of go over this. So according to the data, not very persuasive if your presentation is more than 10% of your entire sales process, whether you sell B2C or B2B. Okay. The problem is the average salesperson in any industry, we train 158 industries, both B2C and B2B. Right. The average salesperson in any industry presents almost half of the time. That is a massive problem. That triggers a lot of objections. Telling your story. Hate to tell you this, when you're selling one-to-one, nobody cares about your story. Whose story do they care about the most?
Yeah, right.
Their story, right? Okay. Giving a sales pitch. We've all been taught you got to give a great pitch. According to the data, very low on the persuasion poll. Over here, do you ever watch, I don't know what the version is over there in the UK, but you guys have a version of like Shark Tank, right?
Yeah, it's called Dragon's Den. Yeah.
If you ever watch that here, if you watch the sharks over here, when the entrepreneurs come out and they're really excited and they start pitching their product, you'll notice if you watch the body language of the sharks, they're like, it's like it's like their facial, they just close down because nobody wants to be pitched at and sold to. Okay. Putting sales pressure on people. Now, there's a massive difference in putting external sales pressure on a human being where you try to force them for your reasons. That's why you have so many cancels and refunds, okay, and unhappy people, compared to getting the prospect to feel so much internal tension inside from your questioning ability that allows them to see how bad their problems really are and the consequences of what happens if they don't do anything about it. That's internal tension. That's where it's their idea to purchase what you're offering. That makes them happy. Massive difference when you understand the differences in those, okay? And assuming the sale, according to the data, very low on the persuasion poll. Hence, that's where we really believe that term sales is a numbers game comes from. It's a numbers game because of how you're communicating that triggers most of your prospects to run the other way. That doesn't mean you're going to sell every single person, but instead of selling 1 out of 10, why not learn the right skills to sell 6 or 7 out of 10? It's just way less numbers, right? That's the first mode of selling. Now, the second mode of selling is more known as consultative selling. Okay. Came out in the 80s with books like Spin Selling, Sandler Institute methodologies. It was revolutionary in that time. And spin selling, Neil Rackham, college professor, never sold anything, by the way, but he taught you needed to ask logical based questions to find out the needs of the client. But what's the potential downfall of only asking logical based questions? We call those surface level questions. When you ask a logical based question, what type of answer is your prospect going to give you?
Logical, not emotional.
Logical based answer. And do human beings buy on logic or emotion? Emotion. Everybody knows that. Brain studies prove that. Okay. Yep. So when you're using questions that every salesperson uses, like, John, can you tell me 2 problems that keep you awake at night? Or, who besides you would be involved in this decision? Or what sort of budget do you have set aside early in the conversation? Well, how can the prospect tell you what their budget is early in a conversation when most of your prospects don't even know what their real problems are early in that conversation, because your questions haven't allowed them to see that they have many more problems than they originally thought they had. So just things like that. So instead of saying, who besides you would be involved in this decision, which is the same standard question everybody asks in B2B sales, you want to relanguage that to like, John, can you walk me through your company's decision-making process when it comes to solving problems like this? See, it's a more curious tone. It's walk me through. It's a lead-in phrase. It gets more openness from the prospect. That's just a little bit of example. Okay. Now, third mode of communication is called dialogue. Okay. So we're the most persuasive, according to the data, when we allow others to persuade themselves through dialogue, when we ask, here it comes, what are called neuroemotional persuasion questions. That stands for NEPQ. Now, the $1 trillion question that everybody always asks, how do I get a human being to persuade themselves? Okay, can you just show up and say, hey, persuade yourself, and by the way, here's our invoice, send in the funds today. You can't, right? You have to learn a very certain set of specific skilled questions, and when and how to ask those. We talked about tone, and a step-by-step structure that gets the prospect to pull you in and sell themselves rather than you trying to force it on them. That's the difference in those three forms of persuasion. Does that make sense?
It does. And my question to you is about the dialogue, the third idea. And I want you to share as much as you're happy to share.
Yeah, anything you want. I don't care.
But what are the, like you talked about tone, and you demonstrated speeding up, slowing down, softer tone, faster tone, harder tone, depends on what you're trying to persuade at that time, or what you're trying to show.
Yeah.
What are the components that mean that, as a buyer, that the things that you're going to say to me that are going to make me, in your words, persuade myself to buy?
It's a step-by-step structure. I'll give you the structure real quick, just as a basic overview so everybody understands. So in NEPQ, you have to learn what are called connective questions. In connective questions, that's the first part of your sales process, whether you call outbound leads, inbound leads, cold calling, doesn't matter. Okay, B2B, B2C. Connective questions take the focus off you, Mark, and put it on the prospect immediately. So right at the very beginning of that conversation, we're getting the prospect into results-based thinking over cost or price-based thinking. Let me give you an example. I'll just give you an industry-specific example so you can see the format. Yep. Let's say you sell solar. I'm just going to throw it out there. Okay. Yep. I was working on a sales structure for a big company. We train that in the beginning. And let's say that they book on your calendar and you're having a virtual meeting. Okay. So I want to start that first question off. Hey, can you hear me? Can you see me? Just little stuff like that. Okay, so it looks like you had booked on the calendar about looking at ways at possibly locking in your rate and lowering your bill, right? See how that first question automatically gets them into what? Results-based thinking.
It's really interesting because you say that I think I'm trying to think it is Persuasion that I think I read. I actually listened to it on Audible, but it's that whole, if you ask the question with right at the end, if they go, yeah, that's right, there's a commitment in saying you're correct, you're right in that way.
That's part of it. I don't really buy in the methodology. Like if you get them to say yes 7 times, they're more likely to buy. There's no studies that actually show that. Just, it sounds good. Yeah. A lot of sales training sounds good, but it's based on more like somebody making it up and it sounds good and it just people start saying it. Right. There's really no studies on it. But yeah, saying right can do that. But notice what I did there. It looks like you had booked on, this is an inbound lead. It'd be modified if it was outbound. It would be a little bit, looks like you'd booked on the calendar about looking at possible ways to, lock in your rate and lower your utility bill, right? So in that industry, that's the result, right? So one thing we have to understand, no matter what you sell, you're not selling the thing, okay? You're selling the results of what that thing does. So in that example I gave you, solar, you're not selling solar or solar panels, but you're selling the results of what that does for them, which is locking in their rate, which is lowering the bill, which is eventually having them after 25 years with the loan programs here in the States, not having a bill. That's what you're selling. If you're selling life insurance, you're not selling them a policy. You're selling them the results of what that policy does when one spouse dies and the rest of the family's financially protected. That's what you're selling. If you sell lead generation to companies, you're not selling them leads. You're selling them the results of what the higher quality leads does for them, which is to make them more sales so they can scale the company. So as a salesperson or business, we have to start putting all of our sales and marketing into selling them the results of what we do, not the thing itself.
Right. Makes perfect sense. I have taken notes, duly noted. I run businesses, so selling is obviously part of that. It's really interesting.
Give me an example. Like, what type of business do you run? Because I think you teach people how to do podcasts and stuff too, right?
Yeah, so I do too. With the podcast arena, I teach people how to start a podcast, and also people who want to, what we're putting a lot of time, money and effort into is podcast guesting. So you pay us a fee and we'll provide you with 24 or 48 podcasts.
Yeah. So in that example, you're not selling them training on how to run a podcast. I'm just throwing this out. You're selling them the results of what that thing does, which is to get their brand out in the market where they become more credible and they make more money. That's what you're selling, just the results of what the podcast will do for them, not the podcast itself.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you think we're more cynical sort of post-war, after the Second World War, and sales became a lot more part of it through telephone and through into the media age? Do you think we're more cynical about salespeople than we were?
Well, 100%. And there's many different reasons for that. Okay. So that's been going on for a long time. It's definitely sped up, I would say, in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Okay. Because we call that the post-trust era. After like 2008, 2009, governments lie, banks collapse, like all this stuff that we were told just wasn't reality. You know, like our governments and all the world, they're like, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. The next day, Armageddon, we need $5 trillion or the economies are going to fall. You're like, well, you just said everything was fine 24 hours ago. Like, well, we don't understand, right? So it's like all this buildup. It's built up over decades, right? And a lot of it, I will tell you, Mark, is just all the marketing that's going on. You know, we have a client, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but look him up, buy his book. His name is Brendan Kane. Brendan Kane. He has a book, a New York Times bestseller called it's called Hook Point: How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. He's one of our clients. He does all the social media for MTV, Taylor Swift, Rihanna. He's a huge influencer here in the States. Okay. We do all of his sales for his company, his programs. And in his book, he talks about, because of kind of the era that we live in right now, okay, with all the advertising going on, with all that kind of stuff going on, that your prospects, your prospects have built up walls of resistance, okay, because they're constantly being sold to all the time, okay. And I would say that the reason that is because we're constantly being marketed to all the time. And if you really think about it, sometimes when I say this, people are like, no, I'm not being sold to all the time. I'm like, really? Let me break it down for you. When you wake up in the morning, so I'll just give examples here, but when you wake up in the morning, besides going to the bathroom, typically, what is the first thing you do?
Me personally?
Just anybody.
Well, I think they look at their phone. They look at their phone.
You look at your phone and you get on your social media, and what do you see? You see ads trying to sell you something immediately from the very first times you wake up. Sometimes people look at that before they even go to the bathroom, okay? Then the next thing you do, you go into your kitchen, you get some coffee, some breakfast. Maybe some of you turn on the TV, and what do you see? Commercials trying to sell you something. You then get in your car because you're late for work or late for whatever you're doing, and you turn on the radio, and what do you hear? Radio ads trying to sell you something. You then drive down the road and you start seeing these big things on the side of the road called billboards. Doing what? Trying to sell you something. You get to work and you take a 10-minute break. You get back on your phone and you notice your aunt is pitching her latest, greatest, MLM opportunity. So you're constantly being sold to and marketed to 24 hours a day. And because of that, human beings over the years, like you've said, have built up walls of resistance. At any time they hear certain words or phrases, it automatically triggers sales resistance, where they have like this protection wall going on. It comes from our reptilian part of our brain, right? So back in the day, when the first humans were put on the planet Earth, maybe that was 1 million years ago, who knows? We're all finding that out. we had this part of our brain, I think, that God instilled us, that we needed to protect ourselves from like tigers that were going to eat us. Well, that's still the same thing that we have, but now we're trying to protect ourselves from being sold to, because we're constantly sold to. So anytime you use words that every single salesperson always uses, like, hey, John, I'm just following up with you, or I'm just checking in. Every single salesperson says that in all their emails and everything. So the prospect, when he reads it, they just associate you with everybody else. And you're immediately commoditized, okay? So you're using words that trigger sales resistance, and you want to learn how to neutralize words like that. And that's a whole nother training, but that's why people are so skeptical, cautious, and cynical, because of we're being marketed and sold to all the time. And it's only getting worse every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the advent of social media and the web, there's adverts and sponsors, and there's all new words, boosting posts and things like that, which is essentially all doing the same thing. Tell me about your new book that's coming out later on this year.
Yeah, it's coming out. I've got a little thing here. So this is the book. It's called The New Model of Selling to an Unsellable Generation. You can go pre-order it online right now, anywhere. And it'll be available in all local bookstores to you guys. I think even in the UK. I definitely know in the United States, like Barnes & Noble, March 15th of 2023. I wrote that with a gentleman by the name of Jerry Acuff. He's the CEO of a very large consulting firm in Virginia called Delta Point. Most of his clients are in the pharmaceutical industry, like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. He only has about 15 clients, but you're talking like the 15 biggest companies in the world. And Jerry and I talk about way more detail about what we went over today, about how selling has changed, why prospects are, why they're cautious, why they're skeptical, like what's caused that. We do a deep dive and we show you how to overcome it as a salesperson or business. Like there's certain things you have to learn. You have to learn how to work with human behavior. You have to learn how to trigger the prospect to let their guard down and become open to what you're offering. Because most salespeople, most businesses, because they still use sales lingo, it triggers sales resistance immediately, and the prospect puts their wall up. And now you're competing against the wall, trying to break it down. So imagine what selling would be like if you just knew how to prevent the wall from ever even coming up.
Right.
Just makes selling really easy at that point. And so that book is a deep dive into that.
That's amazing. Right, I'll check it out when it comes out.
Well, there you go.
So you're a retired salesman. You're now a chairman and founder of this business.
I'm not the chairman anymore.
Okay.
I got let go as the chairman. I'm the founder of the company, so I'm the majority owner, but we brought in a new chairman of the board. We're fairly large. We're probably the fifth largest sales training company in the United States now. So we've grown pretty rapidly. Everybody ahead of us has been in business for at least 30 years. So
my question, it's very impressive. But my question is to you, that the role that you have now versus your 17 years in sales, do you enjoy the side that you're doing now more than the sort of in the field selling?
I mean, there's things I enjoy more now. There's things I enjoyed more then, as a business owner. And I don't even run the business anymore. I'm completely removed from the business. I'm more like the brand ambassador, the methodologies around me, all the virtual training courses. I do most of our keynotes. We only do 2 of those a month. We usually turn down most of them. That's all around me. But as far as running the business, I have a CEO, we have a CRO, a chief sales officer, CMO, like they run all of that, which gives me the time to focus on my core strengths, which is obviously training salespeople how to sell more, right? And that's what you have to do as a business owner. Sometimes you have to start doing everything. You're like the jack of all trades. But if you want to get really, really big and scale, you have to bring in people that are far more talented in areas that you're weak in, right? I don't like running businesses. It doesn't make me happy. So the first year I didn't like that. Once I brought in the CEO and they took over, we just went through the roof because I could focus on my core strengths, whereas they could focus on their core strengths, and that's where you scale and grow. So, when I was a salesperson and, sales executive and manager and VP and stuff, there was obviously certain things that I really enjoyed that you don't have now, but I get massive fulfillment out of client results. We have well over 12,000 testimonials in the last 3 years. That's a lot for our space. And I love seeing that. I love just seeing salespeople that sell anything, sell more. They first of all, they help the prospect solve their problems and get what they want. So that's that's why you should be in sales. All right. Second of all, they get to bless their families with making way more money. So they have more opportunities to do things, and they get to help the company they're working for scale and grow. It's just, to me, like, learning the right skills is just a win-win for the prospect and the salesperson and the company. It's not like the company's great and the prospect loses. Like, the prospect wins when the salesperson learns how to communicate much more effectively, because then the prospect gets the problem solved.
And a lot of successful entrepreneurs often start in sales, and that's one of the reasons why they're often very persistent and sort of wanting to move forward. So I totally get it. A lot of the people that I interview are business owners, have spent a time in sales, and so it's definitely a critical skill. So what's the plan for Jeremy and the business in the next 2 to 5 years?
We're just scaling, one step at a time. We're just focused on our core training and expanding into a few other industries we're not in yet, and just growing the industries that we're in. We just focus on ourselves, and that typically ends up, becoming really good and taking care of everything else. We don't really worry about anybody else. We just focus on improving every day. I know that sounds cliche, but
no, it sounds perfect. What about you, Jeremy? What's your plan?
I'm really focused on the business for sure. So we're all in. So we do crazy things here. Sometimes we get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to do different events in different countries because we actually really like what we do.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. They're a little bit thought provoking, has been described. What's the best decision that you made?
Bringing in the right team to run the business. Best decision I've ever made.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Selling is change, and that's it. It's about how good you are getting the prospect of you in their mind, that by changing their situation, that means purchasing your solution is far less riskier for them than doing nothing at all, staying in the status quo. Their problems stay the same. So sales is change. That's the best advice I've ever heard. Long time ago.
And I think you mentioned someone earlier on. Who's helped you most in your career?
I would say my behavioral science professors in uni, actually.
And are you still in contact with them now?
Not in they don't know who I was. I was just a kid. Unfortunately, no.
Tell me about a regret that you have.
Regret trying to do everything myself the first year. No bueno.
And what are you most proud of?
Client results. At the end of the day, your growth and fulfillment comes from your clients getting the results. That's it. That's how your business your business has to be measured based on your client results.
Amazing. And what does legacy mean to you?
Legacy means this company is not a company that goes away when Jeremy Miner's not here on this planet anymore. Legacy means that this company goes on for 50, 100, 200 plus years. That's what legacy means to me.
Amazing. And lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, if they want to learn a little bit more about what we do, we'll give them some little little nibbles, little hors d'oeuvres that they don't even have to pay for right now. They can go to our one of our Facebook groups, salesrevolution.pro, salesrevolution.pro. We have 52,000 people in there, business owners, entrepreneurs, salespeople. And right when they join, have them check their messenger, and we'll have somebody on their team send them over a free training just on a random subject. Could be some different questions they can ask for different situations to sell more. And we go live in the group 3 or 4 times a week, different Q&As and stuff. Then they want more advanced training like our clients have that are in their industry. They can just reach out in the Facebook group and book with one of our team members, and they can go over different training options if they want more advanced training for sure.
That's amazing. Okay? Thank you very much, Jeremy. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right, brother. See you soon.
Thanks.